I think our music really stands up nowadays. The style, it doesn't sound like old music. But that's why we got signed to Network Records. It's like we were doing something that a lot of people weren't doing, and it was new and modern sounding, and I think that it really stands up nowadays. It's funny, there's this one band, Real Estate, I think they're called. My kids listen to them. They go, man, you should listen to this Real Estate. They sound exactly like you guys in 1985, and I did, and holy crap, it's amazing. It sounds great.
They sound like you.
Oh, yeah. That's why it sounds so great.
I'm Peter McCully. The Grapes of Wrath hit the musical stage more than 40 years ago in Kelowna, one of the more successful Canadian bands of the 80s and 90s. Tom Hooper of the Grapes of Wrath is next on this edition of Today in BC.
Thanks for having me.
Tom, your brother Chris and Kevin Kane comprise the Grapes of Wrath, and you go back to high school in Kelowna, probably even farther back than that.
Yeah, we played our first concert, and I think it was 1978. My grade 7 dance, my elementary school, Glenmore Elementary. Yeah, I was in grade 7, and Chris and Kevin were in grade 9, so that was our first concert.
Do you remember what was on the set list?
We were playing some pretty cool music. Everything from Honky Tonk Woman from the Stones to Just What I Needed by the Cars, a Matt the Hoople song, an Iggy Pop song. Yeah, so I think a lot of people didn't know it too. The teachers didn't know what to expect of us.
Was the Hooper household a musical one?
Yeah, it's funny. I always tell these stories. My dad used to always have a grand piano in the house, and he'd always play the piano, and then every time they'd have parties, when I was in bed listening to them, and I always liked the sound of my dad would be playing the piano, my mom would be singing like Burt Bacharach songs, and a lot of Burt Bacharach in the house, which I think really influenced, I know, my music, because the melody sense, great melodies in Burt Bacharach songs.
Yes, he certainly was very popular, and he penned so many hits. So what was it like growing up in Kelowna in those days, 1978 or so?
When you were a kid in Kelowna, it was great back in the 70s. People always talk about small towns, and you could walk around in the summertime and with your friends when you're like 9 years old. And of course, you're always on the water. I had a Hobie Cat sailboat, so I'd be sailing every day. But when I became a teenager, musically wise, there wasn't as many things to do. So we basically just jammed in the basement for the most part and dreamed of the day we were going to leave Kelowna.
The Grapes of Wrath is an interesting name for a band, and you've had some very interesting names for your bands. Tell me about the Gentlemen of Horror.
Gentlemen of Horror was a band that was just me and my brother and our friend Don Walchuk. I was, I think, like 13. My brother was 15. We were a punk rock band, and we put our own concerts on. And I remember we did this concert in City Park, and I did all the bookings for these concerts, and my voice hadn't even changed yet. I remember, and I booked this concert at City Hall for this bandstand in City Park, and then I guess we put these posters around town saying punk rock concert. And so I guess the people in charge didn't think that they booked it to a punk rock band, so they called me into the office like the day before in the City Hall, and I had the contract, and I remember telling with my high voice, you can't cancel 48 hours before. I know. Since we know that, but you should have told us. Anyway, there was like 300 people there, including the mayor. It was quite a funny time. But yeah, we made a single back in 1980, and that was just a couple of years before the Grapes of Wrath.
So you were the Danny Partridge.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. I almost got ginger red hair too. You could say almost.
Who were the bands that were influential in how your sound developed, and who did you listen to? You named a few on your set list. And were there British Columbia bands that you'd include in that list?
When we first started out in our basement, when we first started jamming, basically the reason we became friends with Kevin, me and my brother, with Kevin Kane, was we were all into the Beatles and the Who and the Rolling Stones, and not many kids our age were into that. A lot of people were more into the disco thing was big and all bubblegum kind of stuff. So we would just play Beatles songs and stuff in the basement. And then we got into Sex Pistols and punk rock, and it went from there into more, I guess you could say British, I don't use the word new wave, but like bands like The Cure and stuff like that. And then REM in these kind of college alternative bands, although alternative wasn't a name back then. Of course, bands from Vancouver too. They were kind of unknown for the mainstream, but bands like the Pointed Sticks and DOA and the Subhumans, and we were influenced by them because they all made their own records. And so we'd go down to Vancouver to get these records because you couldn't buy them in regular record store. They would like press maybe 500 or 1,000 copies of their record. And we thought those guys were like rock stars to us. And that's what we aspired to. We didn't aspire to sell 50 million records. We thought, well, if we can do what DOA did and sell 500 copies, that would be amazing. And yeah, so that's what we were at the time.
About 10 years later, you did have a very big commercial success and a critical success with the 1989 album, Now and Again. Maybe you could talk about the inspiration behind the album and its impact on the Grapes.
That was the big one. The thing with the Grapes, too, and with our management, we were signed by Network Productions, which was, I guess people know Network mostly because they signed Sarah McLachlan a few years after us. The co-owner, Terry McBride, signed us, and he always had a really good plan. The plan wasn't to have the one hit, and it was like a building kind of thing. And we did a 4-song, 12-inch EP in 1984, and we toured across the country with that, and we brought boxes of records with us and sold them off the stage. And then the next record, September Bowling Green, our first full-length album, Capitol Records started getting interested in us, and they wanted to do a remix of one of our songs of that, so they got Tom Cochrane to remix it, and that's when we first met Tom Cochrane. And so that record did pretty good in university radio in Canada. And then the next album, Treehouse, we got Tom Cochrane to produce the whole thing, and that was our first gold record. But still, it wasn't as big as that. Yeah, then the Now and Again album came out after that, and we recorded that. That was our first full-length, full-on signing with Capitol EMI Records. So it was the big deal, basically. And there was lots of pressure, and we recorded it down in New York State. And it was a very hard record to make. The producer was very demanding on us. But at the same time, I know personally I became a way better songwriter, a way better singer, a way better bass player, because I'd never been pushed so much. And we always thought we had a certain amount of popularity in Canada. We thought we were like the greatest thing at that point, but he put us in our place pretty fast. But when that first single came out, and I remember we were playing the PNE, and after that single, and All the Things I Wasn't, was quite a big hit on Much Music and on the radio. And all of a sudden we had these screaming girls and these gigantic, huge fans just going crazy. And I remember calling my girlfriend, and she's out in Toronto, and I said, I just can't believe it. You wouldn't believe it. It's crazy. And then the whole tour was like that.
You must have been pinching yourself a couple of years later when you did the album These Days as you're a big Beatles fan, and then you're recording at Abbey Road Studios with John Lucky, who's worked with John Lennon and George Harrison. Was that a pinch me moment the whole time?
Yeah, it was. Especially me, I'm like the biggest Beatles nerd in the world. We recorded a lot of it at Mushroom Studios in Vancouver, and then John Leckie, our producer, said, I really want to mix this at Abbey Road in London. And we were like, yeah, oh, great. We went there, and we basically were put up at the flat, which is basically attached to Abbey Road. In fact, I was just playing a gig last night, and I was telling the story. My bedroom in this flat, there's a picture of the Beatles hanging out in this bedroom, and Ringo standing on top of the fireplace mantle, and that was my room. And my courtyard windows opened up to the Abbey Road Studios. It was really incredible, yeah. And one night, I remember John Leckie, our producer, basically, Studio 2, where the Beatles did all the recording, it's kind of like a shrine now, like a museum, like no one goes in there. But John's been working at that studio forever, so he can do whatever he wants. So he let us go there one night, and we got a bunch of beer, and our girlfriends were there. And we had a big party in this Studio 2 and played the Beatles piano. And it's funny, it's like winning a lottery or something like that. Imagine if you won the lottery, you won $10 million, you wouldn't be jumping up and down. You'd probably get used to it after a while. And I had to keep telling myself, wow, I just can't believe this. Because like maybe 7 years before that, I would never have dreamed that any of that would have happened. So it was pretty amazing.
In the 80s and the 90s, the Grapes of Wrath were one of the more successful Canadian bands. Then you took a break. You and your brother became part of the group Ginger.
Yeah, I'm really proud of those records. The Grapes, we had already been together for 10 years, and it's funny because I was, 25 or something like that, but we all thought we were old and we didn't get along, so we broke up for a while and did Ginger.
In those early days, Sarah McLachlan opened for the Grapes and even contributed some background vocals. You mentioned that she was signed by Network. On the Ginger album, suddenly I came to my senses she was on background vocals on that one as well.
We've been friends with Sarah since she first was discovered by Network, and then they moved her out from Halifax to Vancouver, and I think she was on 17 or something like that. So we've been friends ever since.
Tom, after a long hiatus, the band reunited, 2010, I believe it was. What motivated you to get back together, and how has the band evolved since that time?
I think the most important thing about what's really bothered me when we broke up is the fact that me and Chris and Kevin, Chris is my brother, but Kevin's our friend. We've been friends since I think I was 10. We used to make movies together. My brother had a Super 8 camera, and they would write scripts, and I was like the little brother, so he'd let me be, here's your part in these movies. And we had so much history together. And then, of course, I had children, and I know Kevin had a son, and it just seemed really wrong that we should be seeing each other. It's just, life is too short to not talk to each other. We got together, and we get along. Our sense of humor is pretty much exactly the same. And we have so many inside personal jokes that no one else would know. And then we decided we'd start to play a few gigs, and the rest is history, basically. And I think the thing I like about us, though, we started out as a three-piece, too. But then a few years into the Grapes, success. We got a keyboard player for a few records, and that was fine, but we've gone back to playing as a three-piece again, and we think it just sounds fantastic, and we love playing as a three-piece.
Some of the best bands that we've ever known are three pieces: Grand Funk, Genesis, ZZ Top, Rush.
Look at The Who, even though it's the singer, but the band's a three-piece basically around.
Having made all those 35mm movies at home with your bandmates must have prepared you for the video craze that was about to descend on you.
My brother, who still does videos, had lots of experience in that. And so we did some really good videos. For instance, the All the Things I Wasn't video, which was nominated for a Juno. It should have won as far as I'm concerned, but didn't. But that was like a one-shot video. Basically, the camera going around us. It was like a one-shot. We did 5 takes of it, basically one shot for the whole song. And we're very proud of that video.
That was the 360-degree video? Yeah.
It went to like #1 in Much Music. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You toured Canada extensively over the years, and you're actually back out on the road doing some concerts this summer. Do you have some favorite places to play, favorite clubs, favorite towns?
A place like the old Horseshoe Tavern in Toronto, it's a classic place. When it comes to places like Ontario, has always been really good for us, even though we're from BC. And Quebec was always really good. For an Anglo band, too, like we were one of the few Anglo bands that actually could do really well with you. I think because they like folk music there more, and we had a folky sense to us. I like festivals, but also I like small, sweaty little clubs. I like wherever people are there that are fans that are nice to us, I like.
When Today in BC continues, Tom Hooper of the Grapes of Wrath talks about the road ahead, longevity, and how the music industry has changed.
From the latest community news to informative, entertaining reads for travelers and the cannabis curious, just visit your local Black Press Media community newspaper website to sign up today.
Why spend hours searching dealerships, comparing makes and models? Find the best of BC's inventory in one place, todaysdrive.com. You'll have access to inventory across BC, where you can easily find a vehicle that fits your needs and gets you where you need to go in comfort. Get in the driver's seat. Don't miss out on the many options we have available for you. Powered by Black Press Media, todaysdrive.com connects you with exclusive new and used car deals.
I'm Peter McCully. Today in BC is a Black Press Media podcast. Tom, you've spent your whole life in the music industry. How has it changed, and how has that change affected your approach to creating music?
It's obviously changed because of the fact that the record industry's gone away to a certain extent. It's funny because I really can't judge what's going on because I am older, and nowadays there's opportunities for young bands because there's so much exposure you can have if you do it right, but you have to work at it. You have to do all the social media stuff, and I don't really do that. We already have a built-in fan base, and also I just don't think, as a person in his 50s, it's just not the same thing anymore. A lot of people now, of course, say, oh, it's everything's horrible, and maybe it is, but at the same time, like I said, I don't know. I have 2 boys who are in the music industry. And it's just not the same. Like in the old days, we could sell records off the stage, like I said, and make direct money. And now no one wants to buy a record, no one wants to buy a CD. But I do have faith in young people. I think that they're going to figure out a way to make money at this again. But even back in my day, no one was making zillions of dollars either. But
we were chatting with Sean McCann, formerly of Great Big Sea, on this podcast not that long ago. And he said, yeah, bands make dozens of dollars now.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I always say, I'm going to be 100-air by the end of this tour.
You mentioned you have 2 sons in the music industry.
Yeah, and they're so talented, right? They grew up here on Salt Spring, but they moved out to Toronto because that's what you got to do. That's when we moved out of Kelowna to Vancouver back in the day when we got signed to our record label. Because if you want to make it in the business, you got to be in a place where there's the movers and shakers. And I think Toronto is definitely the city in Canada. It always has been. I don't think Vancouver is as vibrant as it used to be, but yet again, I don't know. I'm old. But yeah, they're fantastic. They release music, lots of music, and they're great songwriters.
Let's talk about songwriting for a moment. What inspires the lyrical content of your music?
Yeah, I have a hard time writing lyrics. I can't write lyrics. Some people make up things, and to me, it's got to be something that comes from personal experience or observations. Usually it's personal experience. And of course, the older you get, how many songs can you write about your girlfriend being mean to you or something? You can't do that anymore, otherwise you're lying. I do find, like on my last record, I'm quite proud of the lyrics. That's the hardest thing for me. I can come up with a good melody really fast, but it's always the lyrics because you want to make it right. And it's a tough thing.
You mentioned your 2 sons are in the music industry. I'm constantly amazed when I run into young people who are listening to bands from the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and it's all great music. We know that. I can only assume they're finding those tunes because of their parents. Are the younger generations discovering your music, the Grapes music, through various streaming platforms and websites, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we get, messages on our Facebook page, this or that. I just discovered you guys. Oh, this is great. And yeah, it does happen. You don't go to our concerts and see a bunch of crowds of 20-year-olds, probably more likely crowds of 50-year-olds and 40-year-olds. But yeah, I think our kind of music, and I know my kids always tell me this too, like they have their friends in music business in Canada, and we do have a pretty good reputation. I think our music really stands up nowadays. The style, it doesn't sound like old music.
So your music is timeless, in fact.
Not to brag too much or anything, but that's why we got signed to Network Records. It's like we were doing something that a lot of people weren't doing, and it was new and modern sounding. And I think that it really stands up nowadays. And it's funny. There's this one band, I can't remember the name of, or Real Estate, I think they're called. My kids listen to them. They go, man, you should listen to this Real Estate. They sound exactly like you guys in 1985, and I did. And holy crap, it's amazing. It sounds great.
They sound like you.
Oh, yeah. That's why it sounds so great.
When the pandemic hit, a lot of musicians remained creative through Zoom or whatever the case might be. You went to the basement to your studio and created an album.
And also, I would have these weekly concerts in my house. And that was such a great thing because I was by myself the whole time. And I would go online, and I have a certain amount of people who are fans of my music out and across Canada. And it was great. It was like a big party every night. Like everyone's scrolling down, hey, blah, 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 listening from Nova Scotia or this or that. And it was great. It was almost like everyone's being together to a certain extent. And it was really good. Lots of times I have these songs that I keep working on, and then I sit them back and I don't do anything, and I look at them again. And the pandemic kind of made me actually, okay, you have no excuse now. Now is the time to finish this stuff off so the world can hear.
And I believe a cut on that album, which folks can hear on various streaming platforms and websites, is about your grandmother, Beatrice.
Of course, everyone's grandma's the best grandma ever, but I don't know. The song wrote itself, and the words wrote themselves, and I think, oh, my grandma Beatrice. And I know my cousins and my aunts and uncles love the song.
Beatrice in my heart, forever in my soul. Always feel your touch. You taught me what I know. All the times I never realized how much you gave us all. And I never saw you angry. I was just too young to know. Beatrice in my heart, forever in my soul. So many things I do in life. You taught me what I know. Even though you never had too much, you had more inside than most. And your gardens in the summertime were like no one else could sow. Beatrice in my heart, forever in my soul. You've been away so many years, your memory won't go. And we try to bring you back again with the stories we all know. And we talk and laugh and think about how much you made us all. Beatrice in my heart, forever in my soul. Beatrice in my heart, Beatrice in my soul.
Tom, I know you talked about the Beatles a little bit and the Rolling Stones, but if you could meet any musician, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Well, I mean, I could probably think of all these other things and say this and that, but obviously, for anyone who knows me too, it'd probably have to be Paul McCartney. I did manage to see Paul McCartney in concert in Los Angeles years ago. We were assigned to the same Capitol Records, so we got backstage passes, but never got to meet him. He's my biggest inspiration. All the Beatles are as a songwriter, and I just think that how can you top Paul McCartney?
You're touring and doing some dates across the country this summer?
Yeah, we're doing the Winnipeg Folk Festival, the Kitchener Blues Festival, some other festival. We've already done some shows out in Mississauga and Barrie. I play basically almost every night here at Salt Spring as well, at this waterfront restaurant. And I just live across the street from it too, so it's a really nice gig. I can just walk over and play. And I really like Salt Spring Island. It's such a beautiful place in the summertime. So as much as I love touring with the Grapes of Wrath, I don't like to leave sometimes.
Tom, would you have any advice for aspiring musicians who are trying to make it in the music industry today?
I would say that if anything, being original is very important, but also I've heard people say, I decided I'm going to become a musician and become famous, and it's not the way it works. And you shouldn't. I think the true musicians are people who are like, that's all they do. It's like you'll do it anyway. I remember hearing this quote from a guy from Cowboy Junkies, and he was on the radio and someone called in and said, I was thinking of giving a try the music business. How many years do you think I should try? And he's just, there's no time limit for people like us, like Cowboy Junkies. I know people are still doing it. Maybe they're not very smart. Then I don't know that's all they do. And that's all they know how to do. And there's no magic. It's like those American Idol kind of shows. That's not the way music or a career should be. It's not like you're winning a contest. We built up a career of a fan base of real fans listening to your real music. But I sound like a grumpy old man.
Tom Hooper of the Grapes of Wrath. That's this edition of Today in BC. If you have suggestions or comments, send a voice message to podcast@blackpress.ca. You may be part of our podcast mailbag segment. You'll find Today in BC podcasts on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, iHeart, and Google Podcasts.